the National Institutes of Health, right? This isn't made up science. The National Institutes of Health have found that the gliadin protein in wheat has the ability to penetrate the blood-brain barrier, and when it gets to the brain, these gliadin proteins, they bind to the opiate receptors in the brain. Opiate receptors are, of course, where morphine and heroin and other opiate drugs bind. So when we eat wheat, we don't get this euphoria or pain relief like we would with morphine, but we get appetite stimulation to the tune of about 400 calories per day. So I have clients in my office that come back for follow-up and say, Lisa, I'm really upset. Why didn't anyone tell me that if I stopped eating wheat, my appetite would go down? All these years I've been struggling, horribly with low-fat diets and all this nonsense they shouldn't be eating to begin with. And their appetite is ravenous because they're eating wheat all day long. So that gliadin protein stimulates your appetite. That wheat germ agglutinin is breaking down that intestinal lining. And we know now, and you have many experts on your podcast talking about how the intestinal health is related to our overall health. So when that intestinal lining is broken down, that's a big issue. And then lastly, with the wheat issue and various grain components, they have this amylopectin A, which is what we call a super carbohydrate.
Welcome back to High Intensity Health, everyone. We're here with Lisa G, and we're going to talk about the 5 common mistakes people make when going gluten-free. So you're an integrative nutritionist. You've been working with William Davis, the author of the best-selling book Wheat Belly, and you see patients here at Integrative Family Wellness Center in Brookfield, Wisconsin, and you're working on your own recipe book, which we're going to dive into. But before we do, Lisa, let's talk about your backstory. How did you get so involved in getting people off gluten?
Well, it didn't start that way, but it got me. I eventually got there. My interest in nutrition grew early on with my brother has type 1 diabetes, and my dad is now an insulin-dependent diabetic as well. A lot of heart disease in the family, a lot of weight struggles, cancer, thyroid, you name it. My family of origin had it all. And so, I kind of thought years ago there's got to be a different way to handle this stuff, and was getting very frustrated with the results, family members were going through and whatnot. My undergrad is through I would say, traditional schooling, and got out in the real world and worked for a large healthcare organization in the Milwaukee area for about 10 years. And after 10 years, I decided it was really time to fly the coop because I literally couldn't stuff down the type of information they were giving to patients. So, we've all heard the stories about the illogical advice, advised by the USDA and our food guide pyramids and all these sorts of things. And I wasn't going to stick around and wait for the science that the hospitals were using or the clinics were using to catch up what we know to be true as clinicians. And so I finally left after kind of a lot of trepidation, but now being in the field of integrative wellness and getting more focused on gluten-free diets and detoxification, all these sorts of things, it's just it's amazing. And I say that kind of cheekingly because why wouldn't we expect the body to respond so well when we do things it should be doing all along? But complete transformations in health I'm blessed to see on a weekly basis, and it fires me up every day to do what I do.
Love it. So let's dive into that in a little more depth. I think if you go and ask any yoga person in America or anyone that's at a gym, and if you ask them if they're gluten-free, they're going to say, I'm gluten-free. Mm-hmm. But let's talk about, sometimes I've seen this you've probably seen it as well on audio things where they do hidden cameras, and you ask people, say, well, what is gluten? Why is it bad for you? They don't know.
Right.
So let's just do a quick overview. You help people transform their lives and their health, get them off these food antigens. Why are they so bad?
Right. There's a lot besides gluten that's just the gluten protein. So that's the thing people get wrong off the bat is when people say I'm going gluten-free, so they're removing themselves of the gliadin, the glutenin proteins that are the two together in gluten. They're removing that, but there's a lot more harmful substances than just gluten in modern wheat. So my background being that I work with Dr. William Davis, I've had the fortune of him really educating me as well as the whole American population about the problems with wheat, and it's not just gluten. And so what happens is they'll replace gluten with a lot of junky, refined carbohydrate foods, for example. And so you're not really eradicating your body all the problems because some of those replacement products have a host of problems all of themselves. So there's lots of things going on. And when people do gluten-free, thinking it's going to make them lose weight, there's things I could talk to you about that related to why that may not always work because it's what they're replacing it with. They forget about everything else in their diet, but they think if I just eat this gluten-free product, it's going to make me healthy and feel well, and that's not part of it. There's lots of things in our food system, unfortunately, that are making us ill, and it's not just about the gluten. it's also not just about gluten intolerance or gluten sensitivity. When we eat modern wheat, it has proteins in it that basically break down our intestinal lining, and it's allowing all these foreign invaders into our bloodstream that are not supposed to be there. So our gut lining is only one cell thick. It's that barrier that's supposed to protect basically the sewage from our intestinal lining not to get into our bloodstream. And if that, for lack of a better word, that sewage gets into our bloodstream, we got issues. And so I'm talking about bacteria and viruses and different pathogens that are not supposed to get so readily into our bloodstream. So there's gluten in modern wheat products, wheat, barley, rye, that sort of thing. But there's also something called wheat germ agglutinin, which is a very toxic lectin. It's a substance that is in wheat, the wheat plant, and various grains to protect the grain from other bugs, from molds, etc. It's like plants' own antibiotic, right? Or their immune system, if you will. So humans, we have defenses against viruses. We have an immune system, we can fend off things. Plants have these lectins. And so the wheat lectin, wheat germ agglutinin, that has been shown to be very toxic to our intestinal lining. So that is something that destroys that intestinal lining and allows those things in. And so it's no wonder why people have such a wide range of conditions related to gluten intolerance. So they might not have a test that says they have gluten intolerance, but make no mistake about it, the wheat germ agglutinin is still affecting them, right? These gliadin proteins, another protein in wheat that the National Institutes of Health, right? This isn't made up science. The National Institutes of Health have found that the gliadin protein in wheat has the ability to penetrate the blood-brain barrier, and when it gets to the brain, these gliadin proteins, they bind to the opiate receptors in the brain. Opiate receptors are, of course, where morphine and heroin and other opiate drugs bind. So when we eat wheat, we don't get this euphoria or pain relief like we would with morphine, but we get appetite stimulation to the tune of about 400 calories per day. So I have clients in my office that come back for follow-up and say, Lisa, I am really upset. Why didn't anyone tell me that if I stopped eating wheat, my appetite would go down? All these years I've been struggling, horribly with low-fat diets and all this nonsense they shouldn't be eating to begin with. And their appetite is ravenous because they're eating wheat all day long. So that gliadin protein stimulates your appetite. That wheat germ agglutinin is breaking down that intestinal lining. And we know now, and you have many experts on your podcast talking about how the intestinal health is related to our overall health. So that intestinal lining is broken down, that's a big issue. And then lastly, with the wheat issue and various grain components, they have this amylopectin A, which is what we call a super carbohydrate. So it has this branch structure on it that the enzymes in our body can break it down very readily, and that's why wheat has such a flagrant blood sugar response. It raises our blood sugar very quickly. When blood sugar rises quickly, insulin follows suit, insulin being that inflammatory molecule that we don't want a lot of. So lots of reasons why we wouldn't want to have this, modern concoction in our food supply, not just about gluten. And so it's a long kind of story, but when you hear these sensationalized headlines, gluten isn't that bad, and if you don't have a gluten tolerance, you don't have to avoid it. Not so, because we're all being affected by what's in the modern product. So what I see in my practice is I see 5 common mistakes that people make. I alluded to one a little bit earlier, and that's the first thing that they often do when they're trying to do the right thing is they remove wheat products, so they remove, wheat, barley, and rye, anything made with gluten, and they replace it with a gluten-free product. Well, how could that be harmful? Gluten-free products, they don't have that gliadin protein stimulating the appetite, so you may think, okay, that's better. That wheat germ agglutinin may not be there based on the grains that's being used to make that product, so maybe the intestinal barrier isn't being, got holes poked into it like Swiss cheese. Maybe that's not happening. But they're using substitute components in those food products like rice flour and potato flour and cornstarch and tapioca starch. And those substances raise our blood sugar higher than even the original wheat products. So we've read the studies and the research. The glycemic index has been around since the 80s. And so what we know from that is that whole wheat bread raises our blood sugar more than table sugar. Well, what raises one's blood sugar more than table sugar? The food items they're using to make these gluten-free products. So why is that a problem? Someone might say to me, well, I don't have a blood sugar problem. Why does it matter if I eat this gluten-free food that's going to raise my blood sugar quickly? My blood sugar's fine. Well, we know that when glycation happens, when we raise the blood sugar, when the blood sugar goes up, that blood sugar molecule, let's say, that kind of coats your cells like a gumdrop, if you will. And that gumdrop, it's kind of sticky and gooey, and that's where arthritis can develop. That's where cataracts in our eye can develop. That's where heart disease, type 2 diabetes, a lot of things, the nerve endings, so nerve-related issues can occur when we start glycating these proteins. So you may not have overt diabetes, but by having blood sugar surges day in and day out, you're glycating proteins, you're increasing inflammation, you're increasing your insulin, and it's a cascade of problems that gluten-free business is not really the answer. So it really stumps people up. Furthermore, if they're trying to lose weight and they're having all these carbohydrate-rich gluten-free products, good luck, because you can't burn fat in the flames of insulin. So if we are constantly having insulin surges from eating all these carbohydrate-rich gluten-free foods, it's going to be very hard to lose weight. And in fact, I will see many times people coming to see me after being frustrated trying to do it on their own, they're gaining weight eating gluten-free foods. And so that's great when that makes a headline. Says, oh, you gain weight eating gluten-free foods because they're eating junk food. It would be no different than you and I, Mike, having M&Ms and, donuts right now. Even if they're gluten-free, they're not still good for you. It's still candy and it's still junk food. With that being said, the other thing I see very frequently, another tip would be to be careful of that healthy bowl of oatmeal in the morning. One might think it's logical to go to oatmeal because it's gluten-free. Maybe they're buying the special one that's certified gluten-free, and it takes the whole debate out, is oats gluten-free or not. Let's say they're eating gluten-free oatmeal. The problem with oatmeal is if you had, well, let me say it this way. Most of the clients I would see eating oatmeal, most of them are doing the packets. They need to have breakfast in 2 minutes in the morning. Having those instant packets of oatmeal are out the door. If you have a packet of oatmeal with a tablespoon of sugar and a banana in the morning, 5 days a week, through the course of a month, that's equivalent to having 5.5 cups of sugar.
Wow.
So they think they're doing the right thing. I'm going to switch to this gluten-free, healthy, oatmeal, but it's this loaded carbohydrate source, and because it's an instant product, it's pulverized. Our digestive enzymes trample on that, our blood sugar goes sky high, and guess what? You're hungry in an hour because you had an insulin surge and now I had a crash. So even if it's rolled oats or it's steel cut, it's the same type of phenomenon. Maybe your blood sugar is going to be 10 points lower, but you're still having the glycation from the high blood sugar, and it's not a sustaining breakfast. We need the protein and those healthy fats in there. Not to mention, what usually goes in the oatmeal is like raisins, and maybe they're using more than a tablespoon of sugar. So it trips people up when they switch to oatmeal when they're going gluten-free off of their cereal, because it's not really a harm reduction with respect to carbohydrate and weight loss efforts. Another tip would be kind of along the same lines. I'm alluding here a little bit to carbohydrate intake. And so with oatmeal being high in carbohydrate, with the sugar in the banana, and then also now the other thing I see, another tip to avoid would be going gonzo with all these fruit juices and fruit smoothies, and maybe even just too much fruit in and of itself. So if you're a sedentary person, not getting much activity, you're not really burning a lot. That metabolic engine isn't really revving. And so the body will burn that carbohydrate source before it goes to the fat source. And when we're loading our day, starting out with maybe a fruit smoothie, because one might think, hey, I'm not going to do cereal. Now she just told me not to do oatmeal. Now what's left to eat? Well, I'm going to have a fruit smoothie because I know fruit is healthy. Yes, fruit is healthy. I'm not saying it's not healthy. It's got loads of minerals and vitamins and all this good stuff. But guess what? We can get all the nutrients we need from fruit in vegetables without the carb load. So if we're going to do a fruit smoothie in the morning, what I frequently see clients doing is having a handful of berries and a mango and a pineapple and 3-4 fruit servings and whatever milk they're using or water, and they're blending that up. Again, no protein source, no healthy fat source. Same effect. You're going to have a blood sugar surge, drop down. Not to mention within fruit is fructose, which we have heard all about high fructose corn syrup. fructose in fruit is not the same thing. However, it's still going to the liver to be metabolized and we turn it into triglyceride and fat. So if you're not going for a marathon or going to the gym after you have your big loaded, fruit smoothie in the morning or down your, big glass of orange juice, chances are you're storing that as fat. So it's a real innocent slip up that people make. You're going to foods that are naturally gluten-free, which is what I encourage. So not looking for these processed, boxed, gluten-free things, sticking to a meal plan that's naturally free of gluten. However, there's such a carbohydrate load in the fruit that it's challenging for most people. Most people I see have metabolic syndrome, insulin resistance, diabetes, they have high cholesterol lipid levels, they're trying to lose weight. Any of those factors would lead me to plan someone with a lower carbohydrate load. So that being said, it kind of leads to another tip, which is if we're going to dismiss this notion of healthy whole grains, because we're learning now that this healthy whole grains was fed to us by the food industry, and now we have all of this research and so forth that shows it's not the case. Well, then we are not going to be fearful of fats. We have to stop this nonsense of being fearful of fats. So my fourth tip is to relish in the fats. So high quality, organic coconut oil, your olive oil, an organic butter or ghee. Eat the yolks of your eggs. Have, a plentiful source of quality fats in your food plan. When you're removing gluten from your diet, and or you're also going to be dropping down your carbohydrate load a bit, the fats are what are satiating. They're what quench our appetite. They help us feel full. One should not have to have needlessly snacking all throughout the day. If we go back to ancestral, times, which granted we're not ancestral in 2015, but let's just look at how humans, went through and they learned they didn't have a snack at 10 and 2 because it was 10 and 2, right? They just had breakfast, and when they had the next food, they had lunch, but they didn't eat on a schedule. And so this whole notion of having snacks, my philosophy is if you're hungry, have a snack, but you should be able to go 4 to 6 hours without eating. However, if you're doing these carbohydrate-rich foods, morning, noon, night, you're going to be hungry all smacking day. And you're going to be snacking, and because you're snacking, you're going to be eating more. So if you have a breakfast that's a couple of eggs with some avocado and some vegetables, or maybe you're going to have some smoked salmon with some, raw vegetable, or maybe you're going to have last night's leftover dinner for breakfast. If you eat breakfast at 8, you should be able to get to noon. You might even go to 2 and you're like, oh my gosh, I have to eat. Or my tummy finally started rumbling at 2 o'clock and I should eat. The fats are very helpful in that regard because they satiate us. They're needed for every cell of our body. Every cell membrane is needed for that. You have experts on your podcast that talk about hormones. We know how cholesterol is important for hormones. Mood, depression related to, I like to say one of the best ways to formulate or advance, or I don't want to use cause, but that can be related to depression is low cholesterol diets. You're not getting the building block for what you need. And so eating healthy fats actually turn on your fat burning mechanisms, and you can actually release more fat. I know that sounds so counterintuitive to maybe some of the listeners, but it's absolutely the truth. If we eat the fats, our body can release the fats. And so good quality, healthy fats we're talking about. And the last tip I would say that I see people make the mistake when they're venturing into a gluten-free and or wheat-free diet, whatever word we want to use, is they're often giving up because they feel worse before they feel better. And so when we get off this opiate stimulant called wheat and this thing that's destroying our intestinal lining, wheat and gluten, what happens is sometimes we have wheat withdrawal where we feel cruddy for a 4 or 5 day period. I see it all the time in my practice. Not everyone goes through it, about 40% of people. And I would say the real heavy users, if you will, of the wheat products, they tend to have the most experience with this, where for 4 to 5 days, they may have a headache, low fatigue, be a little more irritable. They may have some GI distress. And so they feel worse before they feel better. And then they think, what? I must need it. I must need to eat it because I didn't feel this way when I was eating it. Well, it's like anything, Mike. If you were an alcoholic and you were trying to give up alcohol, I wouldn't say to you, well, have just a little bit and you'll be okay. It's this abstinence. It's this pulling it out, just like someone trying to come off of alcohol or smoking or whatever. You do have withdrawal. It's something your body has been ingesting day in and day out for most people every meal of the day for how long, and when you take that opiate stimulation out, your brain isn't really happy. So it can be a 4 to 5 day period where you may not feel your best. It's not critically harmful. Everyone survives. You want to make sure you're hydrating, make sure you're getting enough salt. I put a lot of folks give a little bit of magnesium, that can help as well. But it passes usually in 4 to 5 days, and you move forward from there and you feel better. So just note that that can happen when you're going truly, free of gluten and sticking with more single ingredient whole foods. That does pass. The last point, I guess, kind of tied to that would be where I'll have clients say, well, what if I just have it a little bit? Can I just have it a little bit? And, it's Christmas or a holiday, and I'm just going to have some of grandma's pie. I say, well, you get to drive the bus. You're the captain of your own ship, whatever analogy you want to use. And just know that when you rid your body of that, it's like you're healing up, right? So if the intestines were wrecked and we started healing those up, and then now we put in this damaging substance back into our body, it's like ripping off the Band-Aid. So the asthma might come back. The acid reflux will come back. The brain fog will come back. Running to the bowel urgency comes back. The running to the bathroom. Various effects, depending on what that person was experiencing initially, often comes back with a vengeance. Just because, like I say, in a good analogy, like you're ripping off that Band-Aid. The body was healing, and now you're re-injecting that in there. It's kind of a shock to the system, and you have these wheat re-exposure or gluten re-exposure symptoms that, again, you can survive through, but eventually you get to the point where you say, you know what? It's not worth it for me. It's not worth it for me to feel that way. Or someone might say, I'll deal with it. I deal with it twice a year, and I don't feel good for 4 days after, but I'm going to choose to do that. Each to their own. Everyone gets to choose what they want to do on their journey. But just know when removing the gluten, you may feel worse before you feel better. And the 80-20, or I'm going to have it sometimes, or on Saturday night I'm going to have it, that really doesn't work because you're still exposing yourself to those harmful ingredients in there.
Gosh, there's so much to pull away from there, but I didn't realize all the addictive components of gliadin. So I think that's really important. And then to highlight something else is if people were to say start to feel bad, then they go on the gluten-free products. Is we talked about the blood sugar crashes, so that can maybe create an addictive type scenario because we know that sugar actually feels good and then we crash and then the adrenals fire, so it can create something along those lines. So
it's kind of a combo because if you're looking at wheat and sugar, we now have the evidence that sugar is addictive, right? So we know that it also fires up the reward pathway in the brain. So they've done imaging of the brain and they see the reward center fired up with sugar like it's fired up with alcohol or heroin, let's just say. So they have that mapped out. So we know that sugar is a feel-good chemical. Wheat is in the same vein. It's firing up an opiate receptor. It's firing up a reward center in our brain. So if one is pulling out wheat, which honestly, wheat is in a lot of junk foods and sugary foods and whatnot. So if they're really truly trying to look at the whole quality of their diet and removing gluten, but at the same time saying, oh, I eat too much sugar and I know sugar is not good for me, so I'm going to remove sugar. Then you're pulling two addictive substances out of the system, and so it's kind of a double whammy. But I will tell you, Mike, I have seen astounding transformations in people. I had a gal last week I was working with who, and I'm not saying this is the case for everyone, but her experience was she had been on antidepressant medications for over 20 years. I removed gluten and dairy from her diet in this particular case, and she went through the 4 to 5 days of not feeling her best, and I really support her through that. But on the other side, she's like, I had so much energy. I hadn't felt this way in years. I felt really clear. My moods were up. People at work were like, what's wrong with you? Why are you so happy? She's like, I came home at night, had energy to do things. And then one day she tells me I cheated. And she had, I think it was bread she had of some sort, and she was running to the bathroom. And her acid reflux came back. and she noticed she was really kind of foggy, and that day she was feeling more down on herself. And so obviously depression is multifactorial, but it is one part of her mood that was, she really learned from the experience that, wow, it is affecting my mood and is affecting my health as a whole too.
That's a really great story. So let's talk about some different options. So we're removing a lot of stuff that is causing people to temporarily feel good, but we know long term it's bad. So what do we do? Because you're working on a recipe book, and so I know you have some recipes, and you talked about the smoothie that a lot of people tend to make because it tastes so good, but it causes our blood sugar to crash. So talk about breakfast options, and we can dive into lunch and dinner.
So breakfast, we had talked earlier about not being afraid of fat, which also means we're not going to be afraid of eggs anymore. So eggs being bad for us has been exonerated. Not true. We have scientific evidence to support that eating eggs routinely, even in individuals that have high cholesterol, does not increase our risk for heart disease or stroke. So eggs are on the good list. When it comes to eggs, I like to educate my clients on finding a good quality source. So a pasture-raised egg, if that's not available locally by you, an organic egg. But eggs are really great in the morning, and you can make them a bunch of ways. So if you have time in the morning, of course, you can scramble up eggs, but there's lots of recipes you can get online and all sorts of places for egg bakes. So in other words, taking 8 or 10 eggs, you whip those up, and then just chop up whatever vegetables you would like to put in there. Maybe you, if you're consuming cheese, might put a little cheese in there, or maybe dicing up some gluten-free ham or turkey or whatnot, whatever you want to put in your egg bake, and you put that in a casserole, and you bake that in the oven at 350 for about an hour. You can do the same thing. So essentially you're making scrambled eggs, if you will, but you're putting it in the casserole dish and baking it ahead. You can also do that by putting them in muffin tins. And then you have little muffins that is good for the kids. The kids can grab that, can actually eat it on the go, or mom and dad can eat it on the way to work. So those are some options. I think smoothies are great in the morning. We just have to have a good balance of what we're putting in there. And so we need a good quality fat source. So for example, when I make a smoothie in the morning, I might put half an avocado in there, or I use MCT oil. I put a little bit of that in there for a fat source. You also want to use a good quality nut butter, so maybe you're using almond butter or sunflower seed butter. Some different nut butters are out there. You can put that in there for protein and healthy fats. Some of my clients just actually put nuts in there first and grind that up so it comes like a nut butter. You could use a handful of berries. I like berries best because they tend to be low on the glycemic index. So whatever kind of berry you like, blueberries, raspberries, you get to pick that. And then some unsweetened almond or coconut milk. So another mistake is I very frequently see clients coming in drinking the sweetened almond and coconut milk, or they're drinking the chocolate versions. And so you can make chocolate milk really simply by putting an antioxidant-rich cacao powder in there and mixing it up, and then you have a great source of magnesium, which is a relaxant mineral that most of us are deficient on. So if you want to make a chocolate, just use the real food. Put the cacao or cocoa powder, an unalkalized cocoa powder in there. So a fat, a protein, and then for fiber, doing some ground flaxseed or put some chia seeds in there. And this is the trick. This is a really good trick, Mike, that is fantastic. I just love this. Is a lot of people hear this, you're like, what is she talking about? But green bananas. A green unripe banana is an excellent source, about 30 grams of what we call prebiotic fibers. So these are the fibers that help feed our probiotics, right, or our bacteria in our gut health. So we know we've talked a lot, and again, you have experts on your site that could speak more to it. But as far as the probiotics go, they're kind of like the seed in our garden of gut, if you will. So we have our soil in the gut, and the probiotics are those nice little seeds we want to plant in there. And the prebiotics are like the water for it. So it helps the seeds grow, helps them proliferate, helps them root out all of the quote-unquote unhealthy or bad bacteria, the pathogens, the viruses, the yeast that we don't want are going to be eradicated if we have that healthy gut flora. And so by doing a green banana in the morning, it's not the 30 carbs that we normally think of with a yellow banana, because we just talked about how the carb-rich things can cause problems for people with insulin sensitivity or trying to release weight. But a green banana is undigestible carbohydrate. It's all prebiotic. fibers, so that we as humans aren't digesting it, but the bacteria in our colon are digesting it. So an easy way to get a great smoothie in for the gut health that's pennies is using these green bananas. So I'll go to the store and find the greenest ones I can find, no yellow on them. You can't peel the skin because it's not ripe. It like sticks to the banana. So you cut off the skin, you kind of pop that banana out of there, and then I just place them in a bag in the freezer, and then they're ready to go in the morning for the smoothie. But a green banana with some berries and a nut butter, some, a fat source, whether it be avocado or you want to use MCT oil, or you're going to put coconut oil in there. And then an unsweetened milk would be great, and blend that up, and it's going to stick with you. The chia seed has got so many great minerals in it, your flaxseed. It's just a real potent smoothie in the morning. There's various protein powders that are also very good as well. But again, with that breakfast, you should be able to go several hours without needing a snack. And so a good way to kind of gauge that is, can I go, 4 hours without really being ravenous hungry? If I eat at, 8, and I'm hungry by 10, then I'm usually telling people putting more protein and fat in that smoothie. So it sticks with them longer.
So Lisa, that green banana and that tip is amazing. I'm going to use that myself because I use bananas like post-workout to, replenish those glycogen stores.
Absolutely.
And so I'm gonna do that. I want to hold you to that. That's really
good. It's a great little way, because people will get inulin or they'll get other prebiotic fibers as supplements. And I use supplements in my practice and I think they're great, but most of us would probably agree if we can get a real food source, why not, right? And it actually, in the smoothie, if it's a frozen green banana, it acts like ice. So you don't really need to put much ice in it. It actually kind of saves you a little work, but it works out really nicely. A lot of people say, does it taste funny? I don't think it tastes really like anything. I pick up all the flavors of other things in there. It's kind of just this hunk of ice, if you will, in there that just happens to be a prebiotic fiber.
That's great. So we have a lot of good breakfast tips there, which thank you so much. Now let's dive into lunch and dinner.
Lunch and dinner, the easiest thing for lunch I like to encourage my clients to do is have leftovers. Of course, that can help. So if you're making dinner, cook once and eat twice theory. So then you have that the next day. Salads, of course, can go a long way, but get creative with your salad. So if you have the boring, cucumbers and carrots and tomatoes every day in your salad, what I encourage people to do is just spend a little bit of time on social media, and you can find more recipes that you know what to do with, but maybe come up with a couple new ingredients that you're going to add to your salad. So maybe you've never had pine nuts before, or maybe you're going to try a different vegetable like jicama, for example, and or a fruit. That's a fruit. See how that works. But trying to get a little bit more creative with salad so that it's not boring. And if cheese, for example, a different type of cheese, or even how you cut your vegetables. So if you put cucumbers, let's say, on there, maybe one week you're gonna cut a little of the skin off so you have the stripe, and then have slices of the cucumber. The next week you might cube it, or you might have diced peppers, and the next week you're cutting them a different way. So just trying to get a little bit creative with your proteins as well. If you're using chicken every day, use a different protein. In the winter time, we're in the Midwest and it's winter and it's cold, and so soups and stews go very well. So that's something where I'll encourage my clients to, on the weekend, maybe cooking 1 or 2 soups, and have a couple out for the week for lunch, but then freeze a bunch of them. And then eventually you're going to have your rotation of soups that you're not having, vegetable soup 5 days in a row. You might only have it 2 times or 2 meals, and then you're going to freeze the rest. And then you're going to start building your own arsenal of frozen soups that you can pull out of the freezer. Same goes with making your own frozen meals. So when you're cooking chicken or your whatever vegetables you're using, whatever you're making for the dinner meal, make extra and make your own, essentially your frozen meal, so that you have that after you're done with dinner. You package that up and you can freeze that. Or again, you could put a meal or 2 in for the next day. Some grab and go things like even cans of tuna or smoked salmon are easy when you're on the run. We talked earlier about fruit in excess, but it's not that we can't have fruit, right? It's just an excessive amount of, if someone's eating 6 or 7, oranges a day, that might be too much fruit for a person's body to metabolize. But, someone like yourself, Mike, who's very active, you're going to obviously be able to burn and metabolize more carbohydrate than a 60-year-old sedentary office worker. So it's knowing what our tolerances are, but fruit is the original grab and go snack. So, before fruit snacks came around, guess what? Kids ate apples, so maybe they're going to have an apple, with their lunch and some tuna. I like to mix it with a little bit of mayo and use green peppers to use it as a scoop and have that, obviously we're not doing, grains. So some simple, easy options, that are not going to be too time consuming. When it comes to dinner, it's always 2 vegetables. So if you're not doing a grain or you're trying to keep the starches down, it's always 2 vegetables. So my plate in my house is a meat and then 2 vegetables or, seafood, whatever we're doing that night. But again, get out of your niche. If you're doing just corn and peas and potatoes, we just want to experiment, try new things. So if you're open to maybe trying 1 new vegetable a month, I like to really encourage and emphasize the use of a lot of vegetables, because if you look through the day now, if you had veggies in an omelet and you had a salad, or you had some kind of vegetables in a soup or stew, or you had, let's say for dinner, you had whatever type of protein with 2 vegetables, most people's comment as well, I'm eating way more vegetables than I ever consumed, which is fantastic. That's the goal. So I get a little miffed when people talk about, paleo or grain-free eating being, it's like Atkins. No, it's not like Atkins. People are eating more vegetables than they ever ate.
Right.
And we're not talking about gluttonous portions of, eating, half a cow a day. We're talking about high quality, grass-fed, pasture-raised. There's a big passion in this movement about the quality of food we're using, but we're also emphasizing, the produce, your vegetables, who's overweight because they eat too much cauliflower, right? Who has high blood pressure because they have green beans every day, So some of these chronic illnesses, the nutrients that we need, all those bold colors provide all those antioxidants and nutrients that we want to quench inflammation, to help us feel our best. And so doing some simple shifts in maybe your mindset about what it would look like, I think can get people a long way.
Great info, Lisa. So speaking about nutrition, so we're getting all these micronutrients from food, all these vegetables, healthy amounts of fruit, balanced with protein and fats. So we're not spiking blood sugar. Let's talk about other nutrition, maybe from dietary supplements. So Sally Smith has been eating gluten for a long time. She's psychologically addicted, loves the sugar components and so forth. She's having GI issues, maybe some withdrawals after she's getting off the gluten and wheat and so forth. What are you going to recommend from a supplemental standpoint after you fix the diet to help ease things along?
Yeah. One thing I'll use to help the gastrointestinal lining, a lot of times I'll use L-glutamine. So L-glutamine is the food for the intestinal cells, and so that's a supplement, generally in powder form, that I will utilize. 3 grams a day is a good starting point, and have her that particular example, have her do some glutamine. So what you mentioned in your example was the first thing she did was she rid the foods that were causing the problem, and now she's replacing them with truly healthy food. And now we want to repair and reinoculate her system. So repairing, it would be what the glutamine would do. The other thing I would do is I would add on a broad spectrum digestive enzyme. So many Americans actually have low stomach acid relating to a lot of gas, bloating, burping, GI type symptoms, and we're just not making the digestive enzymes we need to break down foods. So by using a digestive enzyme, it helps you digest your nutrients, absorb them, and assimilate the products you need to, and it really makes people feel a lot better from a GI standpoint. There would be testing involved to look at some nutrient deficiencies, such as maybe vitamin D, obviously, B12. We would look at iron stores, might look at things like glutathione. So there'd be various things that I would do. And to speak to the withdrawal part, which we could use something called 5-HTP, which is a mood booster. It's been shown to help with appetite, down-regulating our appetite. When serotonin goes up, appetite usually goes down. So we can use 5-HTP, but I'm generally a little bit hesitant just to throw that in the pot if I don't know what the neurotransmitter picture looks like. And so I'm fortunate to work in an integrative clinic in which we do neurotransmitter testing. And so if I have someone who's maybe they would have other issues leading to why I would do neurotransmitter testing, such as hormone imbalance, which I think is all of us usually, and or maybe some depressive mood symptoms. Maybe they're coming in on a antidepressant. I wouldn't want to just throw a 5-HTP at that. It's kind of, you're not really sure what's going on there. And I would want to look at some neurotransmitter testing. And I probably would do that before doing any type of mood-related supplements, just so I was confident what was going on. Those are probably the main, and the probiotic, so I would talk to them about natural sources of prebiotic fibers, and then definitely putting them on a probiotic for sure.
Mm-hmm. You brought up something really good there, and I think fermented foods and prebiotics are very beneficial. And there's this whole small intestinal bacteria overgrowth, and these can backfire in
Yep.
A subset of the population. So, in your practice, what do you see in terms of SIBO, small intestinal bacteria overgrowth? How often do you see like the green banana or the probiotic or the prebiotic backfiring?
Yeah, that's a really good point, Mike. I've seen it. I'd say if there's 10 clients I'm working with, probably 1 or 2 out of 10. I mean, it's not that it doesn't happen, it does. And so a good rule of thumb with that is I've learned to be better at advising that green banana. If someone has, their gastrointestinal system is just a wreck, and they're a good sign is their several nutrients are depleted on their lab panel. They got yeast overgrowth. They might have mycoplasma going on. They test positive for Lyme. So again, I'm at the benefit of seeing the lab results often before they come to me, being that I work in an integrative clinic, and or asking for more lab work. But someone who has a lot of imbalance going on, I would tread cautiously with them. Those are also people who kind of backfire with probiotics. If you jump too much in too fast, you're like, oh my God, I had diarrhea and I was bloated. And same thing with the green banana. It's a prebiotic fiber that's watering, the good bacteria. But if their good bacteria is so out of balance, it doesn't work as well. And so I might have them do like half a green banana. I might start them on, as little as like 10 billion probiotics a day. So just starting them slower and really focusing 112% on cleaning up their diet and not putting those offending foods in. So those are the people I'm going to really try to educate and support and encourage during the changes more, because again, every time they, indulge in gluten foods, it's like ripping off that Band-Aid. Their healing is going to take longer. With the SIBO, I would also talk about the sugar more, because I see very commonly they often have yeast overgrowth, in parallel to that, and so it just creates this whole flora down there that's just so out of control. It's like, where do you start in some of those cases? And so, if you're eating clean, healthy, whole foods, it's really helpful for all of the above. So there's really a safety net in my practice, and why I love nutrition is, I always say, like, I became a nutritionist and not a doctor because I'm not going to kill anybody. You know what I mean? Like,
Right.
if they, they won't feel their best, but it's, it's pretty darn safe. And what I mean by that, if my tool in my tool bag is a clean, whole foods, food plan, people are going to do pretty good. Your point is, if they're having small intestinal bacterial overgrowth, we have to be careful at how much we're throwing in there, because that system is not going to maybe respond to it, or won't respond to it like, someone who's doing maybe a little bit better, obviously.
Really good point right there. So let's dive into your book. So a lot of recipes, a lot of great stuff here. I know you're coming out with a book, and you're diving into some great recipes. Where can we learn more about that, and when can we expect that to come out?
Yeah, it's in the works. It's in the process. I'm aiming for early 2015 release. It will be grain-free. I'm at this point keeping it dairy-free. But you can learn more about it and everything I'm doing on lisagnutrition.com. So that's my personal website, lisagnutrition.com. I also have a Facebook page by the same name, lisagnutrition.com. Go there. I'm always, posting little tips and recipes and so forth. And Facebook is kind of a nice sounding board for recipes and feedback as you're going along the way. But my rationale for doing the cookbook was, I see every single day when I work with clients, they say to me, Lisa, tell me what to do. I don't know what to do. I don't know where to start. I'm overwhelmed. And they want simple, easy things to do that don't have, 20 ingredients, and, they don't even understand what maybe coconut oil is, or what is this thing ghee? I've never heard of that, and where do I buy it, and what's this business about chia seed? And it's things that, Mike, for you and I in the field, it's common knowledge. It's so understandable. And how could you not be cooking with coconut oil, But for I am always reminded and humbled how much, how could I explain it? How much gap in knowledge, maybe might be the way to put it, there is for the common consumer, and hence the confusion on what to do. So I just came back from a holiday with my family for Thanksgiving, and I opened the pantry, and I was in there like, holy smokes. And they're supposed to be listening to what I'm telling them, and I'm looking at this pantry like, oh my gosh. But that's the average, American to some extent, who just, they don't know where to start. And a lot of times they don't start because they're overwhelmed. And, they'll say, Lisa, well, we ask you about this and that, but it's too much. So the point of the book is to drop everything down on a very simplified, easy to understand implementation. Should be a breeze. Meal plans, grocery guides, all that sort of thing, just to pick it up and run is the goal. Yeah.
That's a really good approach. Yeah, it's funny when you go to friends or family's pantries. It can be scary sometimes.
Well, and I always have to preface: I'm not the food police. I'm not, but I am looking. I can't help it. It's in my blood. I am kind of like checking out. Like, well, I don't say anything, but it just reminds me. I'm very humbled to say it actually encourages me that there's more work to be done. Because these are my immediate family members that are struggling with various health ailments, and part of it is their diet, and obviously there's stress and lots of other things related to how we feel, but there's still a lot more work to be done. So the reason, part of what we do is obviously we want to help other people live their best life, not live with chronic ailments that are unnecessary.
Love that. Lisa, thank you so much for being here. Now, for patients that would want to reach out to you, Lisa G Nutrition, is that the best site still?
Yep. Lisa G Nutrition is my private practice, so I do online consulting through that website. And then if you are in the Milwaukee area, I do consultation as well at a business called Integrative Family Wellness Center. It's in Brookfield, Wisconsin. Their website is ifwcenter.com. So you can go to that website if you're local. Otherwise, just hit me up at Lisa G Nutrition and I'll get to you there.
Awesome. Thanks so much for being here.
Thank you.